Hey, what's up, guys? This is the Leafs Convo podcast. I'm Norman James along with Mike Augello. Happy late summer. Hope all is going well in your world. Mr. Augello, what is going on, my brother?
Good afternoon, Norman. I'm doing well. I did see some photos of you eating a pickle pizza at the CNE, and it's funny. I like pickles. I like pizza, but the combo, I don't know. I don't think I could do it.
Well, thanks for creeping my Instagram, by the way. It was delicious. It was delicious. I needed a big honking thing of ranch dressing to dip it into. Didn't have one, but I'll be back next year to explore Pickle Pizza Plus and rip through that food building. Going bankrupt in the process, but the CNE brings back a lot of memories for me and my childhood. Did I rekindle the memories? Did it feel like the old days in these new days? I think a little bit, though the streetcars are nowhere near as rickety and dangerous as they once were. Anyway, Mitch Marner still not signed up with the Maple Leafs. We're less than a month away from the rookie camp and the tournament to follow and the training camp and preseason. Should we be concerned about anything, Mike, or do we think that this guy will get signed up somewhere, I don't know, early November?
If I had to, I still believe that it's going to get done before the beginning of the regular season, but you've seen essentially sort of a raising of the temperature on both sides here, even though, Kyle Dubas and Marner's camp have kept negotiations out of the press and done a pretty good job of that. Over the last few weeks, you've seen, the parameters of potential offers leaking out, whether it be Chris Johnston talking on the Tim and Sid show a few weeks ago, or James Myrtle's piece in The Athletic, where they're talking about the parameters of a 3-year deal or a 6-year deal or a 7-year deal and how much money. And I think none of those reported figures holds the Marner camp in a particularly good light, because I think most people think that Marner's a great player and that he deserves to get paid. But when the Leafs are supposedly offering him $10 to $10.5 million on a 6 or 7-year deal and he's not accepting it, and the talk coming out that he wants to be paid at the same level as Tavares or Austin Matthews, I don't think that's good news for the Marner camp in terms of them winning the PR battle. And we saw this week, apparently came out from Rick Dollawall from Sportsnet, then confirmed by TSN's Darren Drager, that Marner's agent is looking into him potentially going over to Switzerland and playing for the Zurich Lions, at least practicing with them.
Oh my goodness!
So right, and then so this is sort of an escalation. They're starting to play the William Nylander playbook, and Darren Ferris did this apparently with Athanasiou in Detroit a few years ago, where he threatened to go to the KHL. He never ended up doing it, and he ended up signing with the Red Wings, but that's sort of like a threat to the Leafs that, okay, well, your offer isn't good enough, so we're going to explore practicing. And, I would assume the next step would be, well, we might sign in the Swiss League.
Wow.
And, I don't know that that hasn't been reported. I'm just saying if he's going over there to practice, then it seems an awful long way to go to just skate around with the team. He could probably do that with the London Knights and Mark Hunter if he wanted to, but he's going over to Switzerland, or at least it's that was floated. Now the team came out and said that they haven't made a decision, which I think undercut Marner's camp a little bit. But it's gotten to that point where there's threats of him going someplace else to do things, and that's not good.
This is the Leafs Convo. Mike Augello in Buffalo, Norman James in London. Speaking of London, the Knights and their kingdom have always been a haven for players who are warming up for the season, recovering from injury, waiting to get a contract. I remember Ryan O'Reilly being a fixture at Budweiser Gardens when he and the Avalanche couldn't come to terms. Ferris, Paul, and Mitch, to an extent, seem like half a bunch of big babies and half biding their time, waiting for the Maple Leafs to, open the door a little bit more, maybe open the coffers a little bit more. It's interesting, though, and ironic in a way. They want what Austin Matthews wants and are at least threatening to go play where Austin Matthews once played when Austin Matthews was 18. It's kind of pathetic, isn't it? Mitch Marner, 3-4 years into his NHL career, going to play where Austin Matthews played before he was drafted. I mean, the optics aren't great right now. They're not going to look much better if he actually does go to Europe and do this.
I look at this as, I mean, it's a leverage play. I believe it's, putting pressure on the Leafs, or at least a shot across the bow to say, well, this is an option for us. I don't think it's a realistic option. I don't think he's ever going to play in the Swiss League. He probably wouldn't make enough money, not even close to what he would make in the NHL. And even if he made significant money, he would probably be spending a lot of that on insurance in case he got injured over there. I mean, it's a whole escalation of things. But I think what this rumor illustrates is the fact that the offer sheet option is gone, because he wouldn't be floating going to Switzerland to practice if there was a team out there willing to offer him a 7-year max deal on an offer sheet that he could use to apply pressure to the Leafs to get a contract. The Leafs know that there's no offer sheet coming. They know that Marner wants to play in Toronto. They're making him fair offers. They don't think that the Marner camp doesn't think they're good enough. So I think they're going to play this out as long as they can, and hope that the Leafs and Dubas break down. I just don't think the Leafs and Dubas will break down this time.
Mike, the threat of an offer sheet is slightly less exciting than trade deadline day in the NHL. There's not a lot there. We saw the Canadians try to do it with Sebastian Aho. Didn't work. It really doesn't amount to much more than bluster and, the creation of little bad blood. A lot of questions from the local media. Really, what is it all about?
Really, there's no there when it comes to the offer sheet. The Aho offer sheet from Montreal was pretty much a joke. Most managers think it was, because it really wasn't a challenge for Carolina to match it. It didn't hold their feet to the fire at all. And unless a team gets a player like Marner locked up for 7 years, where it makes it worth their while to give up 4 first-round picks, they're not going to do it. And most of these RFAs, they want shorter-term deals so they can have another contract get in their mid-20s while they're still in their prime. So that's why, until there's a new CBA and maybe some changes in the rules, it's not going to change. But the problem is these players, their only leverage is to deny their services, and that seems to be the case with Marner right now, and who knows how long this is going to last.
Justin Solnier on Twitter, how do you think the Gardiner situation will play out? 1 year? Is it an option?
I doubt it, simply because there are teams out there still looking for defensemen. Right now, everything is frozen because of these RFAs. There might be teams out there that want Jake Gardiner, but they're basically looking to solidify some of their other signings or find out whether they can make other moves, and then Gardiner's contract comes into effect. There's been talk about him having a handshake deal with another team, but that hasn't come to fruition, and nothing is moving right now. I mean, the Colin White signing yesterday was the first RFA that sort of broke in the last few weeks, and he wasn't one of the big names. Until one of the big names breaks and then all the others start falling in, everything is frozen. So I think that includes like Rasmus Ristolainen getting traded in Buffalo and Jake Gardiner getting signed wherever. But I still don't think it's going to be in Toronto, because Toronto will not have the cap space to sign Marner and keep Gardiner.
A handshake deal. What is this, Punch Imlach and Eddie Shack? What are they, drinking whiskey? All right, let's do a deal. 1 year, $35,000. We're in.
Well, I mean, it doesn't offer a lot of security for a guy who had a back injury last year, and that might be a question of, one of the reasons why teams haven't signed him up yet. But I still think there's interest in him. It's just the question of how long and how much, and I think it's going to end up like Cody Franzen did a few years ago, where he's going to end up getting a 2-year contract somewhere.
I don't want to shit on Gardiner. Okay, we've reconciled our Gardiner distrust and devaluation over the years. But if this guy is as good as his, his backers and his supporters have made him out to be, why wasn't he one of the marquee free agent signings in July? Why is he not on a team right now making outrageous amounts of money, copious amounts of cash? I know he's got some injury issues, but I don't understand if he were one of the marquee players in the league, one of the best defensemen in the league, as many have made him out to be, why is he still a free agent? And I'm not shitting on him, Mike. I'm just asking the question here, and obviously I know the answer.
I know they're two completely different type of players, and I keep going back to this comparison because Franzen was a slower defenseman, right-hand shot. Gardner's a faster, better skater, left-hand shot. There are a lot of differences between the two, but the one thing they have in common is they're both analytics darlings. And the one thing they have in common is when they hit unrestricted free agency, by some miracle, they didn't get signed for a while. And that either says, well, that not everybody in the league is still buying into analytics, or the general managers in this league recognize that they're not as good as they've been sold as by that particular community. I think Gardiner is a fine offensive defenseman. Defensively, at age 29, he's a train wreck. He always will be. I haven't seen one improvement in his defensive game in the last few years. If he was improved, I think the Leafs would have signed him to an extension. They didn't. They've moved on. He's not coming
when you look
back.
At a player one way and you create a narrative, I mean, you can push that narrative any way you want, and you can generate a followership for that narrative, as we've seen over the years with particular players, and the way, certain criteria is parroted and repeated and echoed through the echo chamber that is social media. It's the same thing over and over again. It's with Nylander. He scored three even strength points in the playoffs and was 1 point better than Marner, and then everybody starts pushing that as if that means anything. But that's essentially what happens with these guys who are used by a particular crowd to push their own beliefs, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, the chickens come home to roost, and it never works out for that community, ever. It's just unfortunate because what happens is these guys get a bad name in the process, and they develop a bit of a characteristic in the process that's unfair to them. A few more minutes, Michael, and then I'll let you continue on with your summer, and then you and I will really ramp it up in September. I want to thank all of the Leafs converts and the hate listeners and whomever who continue to come back to listen to what Mike and I have to talk about. It means a lot to us. And as you know, we are men of our word. We will be back with bells on once the season really kicks into high gear, and hopefully number 16 is signed up by then, but I'm not holding out any hope. Matt Marner watch. I think we answered that for him. Also, we have a question here. Last idea. Do you see the Leafs inviting any D to a PTO, or are they content with what they have? Mike, you talked about Dan Girardi potentially getting scooped up by some team and, getting an opportunity, a bit of a tryout, when push comes to shove. But don't the Leafs have enough defensemen now? Can't we just start to focus on who they have, who they've signed, who they've traded for? And then obviously there are guys in the minors who want to get a crack at this too. It feels like, there's a glut of defensemen, maybe nobody who stands out like Bobby Orr, but let's give some of these guys a crack without having to crowd the situation any further.
Well, I think you can do both, especially with a PTO. I mean, the thing is, if you don't make a move on one and then you realize that the defense that you have is not good enough, remember, Travis Dermott will probably be out till November. They're very, Kyle Dubas has made comments about being very high on Liljegren and Sandin, possibly making the jump to the NHL. But if they think that they need a little more time, then your options are, Martin Marincin, Ben Harper, Kevin Gravel. It's not exactly the cavalcade of quality defensemen. And that's why, today, Andrew McDonald, former Flyer, was given a PTO by Calgary. Calgary lost one of their top defensive prospects to an ACL injury, Yusuf Alamaki, and they bought out Michael Stone. So they brought in McDonald as sort of a stopgap in case he plays well and some of their other kids aren't ready. They can sign him to a 1-year contract. I think the Leafs can do that. As to whether they will, Girardi is out there. Ben Lovejoy is out there. Dion Phaneuf is still out there. Maybe these guys are not, they're not good enough to do it anymore. But I think there's no harm in looking. And if any of them are willing to take a PTO and try to earn a job, I think it's worth the while.
Does Dion Phaneuf find employment before the exalted, the legendary Jake Gardiner? I mean, how would that be possible?
It's tough because there hasn't been a peep about Dion since the buyout. And you would think that a name so prominent as his would have gotten snapped up by some team that is just looking for, bottom pairing insurance. But it may be the case that Phaneuf he's content with his career being over with. You don't know. I mean, we don't know the scenario. It's got to be a particular situation for him where he thinks he has an opportunity to earn a job. I'm anxious to see whether he gets invited anywhere, because if it's like his hometown of Edmonton or Tampa Bay was possible until they signed Shattenkirk. I thought that there was a possibility of him getting signed to a PTO. I don't think that it'll go well if he tries Toronto. I don't think that is an avenue that will work. Although Babcock liked him when he was here, so I thought, maybe there's a chance they would go down that road, but I'm starting to think that's not the case.
Why is it that I have a pathos and a sympathy for Dion Phaneuf that is not there for other players who probably deserve it more? What is it about this guy?
I think he was put into a scenario that it was no win for him. They traded for him from Calgary, and immediately Burke and Ron Wilson put him into the captaincy, which I think he would have benefited from not being captain. He gets the big contract, and nobody's going to turn down $7 million a year when I don't really think he was a $7 million defenseman. That was Dave Nonis' fault. I mean, he was sort of a creature of circumstance.
Yeah, good call.
Guys like Phil Kessel. I think Phaneuf took more of the brunt of the abuse than guys like Kessel or James Reimer, and I think those guys deserved as much or more of the abuse and the blame for the failings of that team than Phaneuf did. But, he's a flawed player. He never turned out to be, the next Scott Stevens as he was billed to be when he scored 20 goals with Calgary. So, but in terms of like, if there's anything left there in terms of bringing him in as a bottom pairing guy, or, if not if the Leafs, if it's even another team, you would think that there's something left in the tank at age 34, but maybe the league has changed so much and the speed has become so much of a factor that he can't play anymore. But we'll see if somebody extends him that PTO.
Yeah, weird bringing up Phil Kessel. When I was in Toronto the other day, we were on the streetcar on Queen, the 501, and just west of Bathurst, there's Phil Kessel crossing the street. And I know, hot dog. He looked really slim. It looked good. He was wearing a white Under Armour hat. And my wife's like, how do you know this Phil Kessel? I was like, I'm a hockey guy. I'm a sports guy. I did sports casting for 20 years. It's in my blood. It'll always be. I know people when I see them. It was Phil Kessel crossing the street. He wasn't crossing at the light. So kids, Phil Kessel might be a superhero to you, but he's breaking the law.
He's a jaywalker.
No, I don't know. And she's like, why is he in Toronto? I was like, I don't know. It's one of the biggest cities in North America. Lots going on. I mean, he played here forever. They're training. There's all kinds of stuff happening. Good for him, But it was just
lots
weird. It's like a million, all these people in this area. It's crowded, it's rush hour and stuff. And there's Phil Kessel crossing the street. Who knows? But any last words from you, Mr. A, before we wrap?
Well, it's just going to be interesting to see over the next few weeks because, like I said, we have I believe it's September 8th or 9th that the rookie tournament in Traverse City begins, and usually no news happens during that's affecting the team. But before training camp, which I believe is on the 14th, to see how many of these RFAs start coming in and whether that affects the Marner situation. I hope for all Leaf fans, because they've been living through this the entire summer, that it doesn't last into training camp and into the regular season. But I'm fearful that it might.
Mm-hmm. Thanks again to all of our listeners. We have a new round of shirts going out to our Patreon patrons. A few that are still left to be sent, but they will be. We're just changing our shirt provider. In the meantime, if you throw a couple dollars at us on Patreon, you get yourself a free Leafs Convo shirt. I'm looking forward to sending those out. I'm also looking forward to many podcasts in the future. My friend, Mr. Augello, Western New York at this time of year is just like Western New York any other time of year. You enjoy it, and I'll enjoy London.
Thanks.
And there's really not much more to say about that. Talk to you soon, buddy.
Thanks, Norman.